How can Vini Jr., one of the best players in the world today, if not the best rated to win the Ballon d'Or, be so ridiculous and not play anything for the Brazilian team? I know, those are strong words and maybe I'm being a little too heavy, but I don't think so, and I have my points for that. Vini Jr. for the national team is a kind of cancer, and his football presented in the Brazilian team is the size of a flea. I keep asking myself how a player of Vini Jr.'s caliber, with so much skill and decision-making power, ends up not performing well in the Brazilian team. I don't believe it has to do with the weight of the shirt, since he wears the number 7 shirt that belonged to Cristiano Ronaldo and plays for Real Madrid. Today's video is a little lighter, to discuss and try to discover why Vini Jr. is so different at Real Madrid and the Brazilian team. So stay in the video. Vini Jr. is coming off one of the best seasons of his career, playing for Real Madrid and being, without a doubt, the most decisive player of the European season. The most interesting thing is that Vini Jr. missed most of the season's games due to an injury that sidelined him for around 3 to 4 months. During this time, the leading role at Real Madrid was all Jude Bellingham's, leading many to believe that Bellingham would win the Ballon d'Or. However, with the return of Vini Jr., the Brazilian star began to gain confidence and was much more decisive than Bellingham, who was not at his best in the second half of the season. Vini Jr. returned from injury with excellent performances and was decisive in several matches, especially in the Champions League, where, even if he didn't appear much, he was providing assists or scoring important goals, such as against Bayern Munich and in the Champions League final. It was more than clear that Vini Jr. would win the Ballon d'Or, just needing one thing: to perform well for the Brazilian team, where he always had great difficulties. These popcorns, if we can call them that, are not recent. Vini Jr. has always been common in the Brazilian team, coming from disappointing moments in hopscotch. You can take all the matches that Vini Jr. played during all his time playing for the Brazilian team, and I guarantee that at least 15 of them he played poorly and performed horribly. To give you an idea, Vini Jr. has only 3 goals for the Brazilian team in 26 games. Very poor numbers for a player who plays on the wing and stands out worldwide at Real Madrid, which is the biggest club in the world and has the most chances of winning titles. There is no clear answer as to why this happens when he plays for the Brazilian national team, as at Real Madrid he is literally a monster. Perhaps Vini Jr.'s main difficulty in the national team is adapting to the coach's tactical system. In Tite's time, he was stuck on the left wing, without much movement, serving only as a winger and without much freedom to try something new. Vini Jr.'s performance with Tite was not the best. He rarely played good games, and when he did, he played in a very tight manner. After Tite's departure and the arrival of the interim, whose name is irrelevant, Vini Jr. was also stuck on the left wing, without freedom and disappearing in the friendlies against Senegal and Morocco, where Brazil were a complete disappointment. When Fernando Diniz arrived, the situation only got worse due to the unfavorable style of play. We then saw the worst performance of Vini Jr., who disappeared from games, rarely touched the ball, and, when he did, he had ridiculous moments. In fact, no player performed well, except Rodrigo, who is very complete and can play both on the left and right wing, as well as creating plays in Neymar's position. It's no wonder he took the number 10 shirt for the national team. He makes ridiculous moves that seem easy at Real Madrid, but that he makes gross mistakes with the Brazilian team, leaving us in doubt as to when he will actually start playing. It's time to take on the responsibility of playing for the greatest team in the world. Vini seems to forget his legs at Real Madrid when he plays for the Brazilian team. And the most impressive thing is that the moves he made at Real Madrid, he ridiculously misses on the Brazilian team. There is no way to defend Vini Jr. in the national team, because everything he tries, he makes mistakes. It's impressive. Even though he plays more freely, he still manages to perform poorly. Gabriel Martinelli, with far fewer games as a starter for the Brazilian team, has practically the same number of goals as Vini Jr. This is ridiculous, as Gabriel Martinelli is a reserve and rarely comes on. It is worth remembering that Vini Jr. is not the only Real Madrid player with a bad spell in the Brazilian team. Marcelo also had the same problem when he played hopscotch, as did Robinho. I don't know if it's a coincidence, but it's incredible how most of Real Madrid's Brazilian players don't perform well for the Brazilian team. In Marcelo's case, it is even more ridiculous. He didn't have any good matches for the national team, always performing poorly, being removed from the main squad early, and no longer being called up. Another point that makes Vini play poorly is our midfield, which, let's face it, is not very good. Receiving a millimeter pass from Toni Kroos or Luka Modric is very different from receiving a wrong pass from Andreas Pereira or Lucas Paqueta, who are not at their best due to the betting controversy. Keeping Paqueta as a starter is a mistake, as he is not mentally well, which affects other players. Vini Jr. is one of those heads, as he depends a lot on the midfielders. When one is bad, the other will be too. I hope that Vini Jr. is not another Marcelo in life. Marcelo was a disappointment, one of the best fullbacks in the world, but he didn't play anything for the Brazilian team. He was more of a winger than a winger. He climbed a lot and was not good defensively, causing difficulties for the team. Brazil needs players like Vini in the Brazilian team, players with decision-making power, but let's face it, his decision-making power in the team is not the best, unlike Vini Jr. at Real Madrid, where he destroys. I hope he improves and maybe wins the Ballon d'Or this year, and that he has a good performance in the Copa America. Thanks for his attention.